This conference will now be recorded.
So hopefully you don't mind, you're now being recorded. Hi, everybody from New Jersey. Selma is in New Jersey. Hello, Selma. So anyhow, my name is Dr. Jeanne Berk. I am the organic chemistry professor at Cedar Crest College, which is in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We're a small liberal arts women's college, and one of my passions is science outreach. And so this kind of came about from a outreach project that we've had on campus. We have what's known as OLA, and it's specifically geared for high school girls who might be interested in the sciences, and they come on campus once a week and run activities, and we try to get different departments around campus to do fun things with them. And so I teamed up with our art department to do a paper making class because that is actually one of the courses that you can take at Cedar Crest in the arts. And so this is going to be a little bit of an interview on plants, the perfect planet protectors, and more. So I'm going to give a little bit on why plants are the perfect planet protectors. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the chemistry and science behind one of the oldest chemical processes known that involves wood, and that is actually making paper. It's been around for over 2,000 years. I'm going to go into the industrial method for making paper, but then I'm going to turn it around and show you how you can make paper at home by using recycled paper. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to go to my PowerPoint. And I will begin. So welcome to Plants, Perfect Planet Protectors, and More. And I'm going to be able to see the chat, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them as we're going along. I can't guarantee I have the answer, but hey, we can always have a discussion, and that's what this is all about. So most of you guys in biology have talked about trees and plants, and we probably all know from elementary school the parts of trees and plants. So we know about the roots, and we know that the roots absorb water and nutrients from the soil, and that the nutrients and water are then carried up through the trunk of the tree into the branches and the leaves, which is the part we probably enjoy most about trees. In spring, as they turn green, in the summer, as we get to have shade underneath them, and in the fall, when they start to change colors. All right. The leaves and the branches make up the crown of the tree, but primarily for this talk, we're going to talk about two important aspects of trees and plants. The trunk. The trunk basically is made up of what we call wood, and it's basically a highly organized arrangement of cells, some living, some dying, and some dead, okay? But when we talk about wood, we can think about it in many applications, as we will see. The other one we're going to talk about are the leaves. And the leaves are like little biochemistry engines and do so much chemistry that you could probably earn a PhD learning about how they work. When it comes to trees and plants, in the United States, as defined by the U.S. Forestry Service, there are more than 750 million acres. And can you guess which state has the most trees? I like being interactive, so type your answer in the box, in the chat, really. Which state has the most trees? close. California comes in the top 3. Nope, not New York. Alaska. Alaska's got the largest number of trees and the largest amount of forested land. Oregon comes in 2nd, and California comes in 3rd. About 2/3 of all the United States forested land is considered timberland, and it's primarily grown and used to produce industrial utilized wood. And actually, surprisingly, most of the land is under private ownership. And so you as citizens have a role. So do you know which country in the world has the largest forested area? Country. And where does United States stand? Oh, Sarah, you're right. Russia. Russia has 815 million hectares. The United States is actually 4th in the world with 310 million hectares. And that's based on research from 2015 by the Statista Research Department, which I'm not exactly where it is, and I couldn't find out more about it, but I thought it was an interesting fact. So we're going to start with talking about the leaves because they are the #1 protectors of our planet when it comes to plants and trees. But then we're going to talk about the trunks because, needless to say, for paper making, the trunk of the tree is where most of that chemistry is going to come from. So all leaves contain a compound called chlorophyll, and I'm showing the chemical structure of chlorophyll on the screen. And in the world of chemists, we find that it has a very interesting ring system shown here in the middle that's known as a porphyrin ring, and it can hold metals in there. In fact, chlorophyll was one of the first compounds isolated that showed magnesium playing a role in living species. The term chlorophyll actually is derived from the Greeks. It comes from chloros, which means pale green, and phylon, which means leaf. And so one of the things that we find that makes chlorophyll very interesting to most students is that it's green. It's the compound that makes leaves look green. And so the Greeks, without knowing it, basically came up with a term to describe it. We find that the leaves look green because chlorophyll actually absorbs red and blue light, and therefore the green light is not absorbed and we see the green. Chlorophyll makes up such a large amount of a leaf that it masks the other colors, but the plant and tree produces chlorophyll based upon light. And so in the autumn, as we get shorter days and there's less sunlight, we see that the tree and plants produce less chlorophyll. And so the green color starts to fade and we get what we love, which is fall colors. And so we start to see yellows, reds, and unfortunately browns. A fun science experiment is to extract chlorophyll in the lab, and it is actually collected and used as a registered food additive. So if you ever see E141 as a color agent in your food, you are eating the compound chlorophyll. And it's commonly used in things like alcoholic drinks like absinthe and also ice cream. But that isn't why leaves are so important as planet protectors. What is important is that they play the major role in a chemical process called photosynthesis. And the process of photosynthesis produces chemical energy that the plant uses for its cellular processes. And to do this, we basically see that the plant is creating its own energy source. And to create that energy, it needs sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Okay? And so it's because the plant absorbs carbon dioxide that we find that they can protect the earth. So what we see is that plants absorb carbon dioxide gas, but in absorbing the carbon dioxide gas, we get a benefit. When the carbon dioxide is absorbed by the leaf, we find that it releases oxygen and water. And this is important because, well, we all breathe oxygen. And so that is beneficial to all of us. But the other side of this is that carbon dioxide is an example of something called a greenhouse gas. And by the tree's leaves absorbing carbon dioxide, it ultimately is lowering greenhouse gas levels. And this in turn slows down climate change, which is something we all see in the news. And so it's because of this process of photosynthesis and the leaves of plants and trees that we find that they are great planet protectors. Another reason that trees are so vital to our planet is the roots. We find that when trees are planted, the roots basically lock in the soil around them, and this controls erosion, especially during storms or bad weather. But on top of that, trees' roots actually can remove environmental toxins. And so we have a special term for this, and that term is phytoremediation. Phyto meaning plants, and remediation, which is the special term for removing those environmental toxins. So if you play Scrabble, here's the word to try to go for extra bonus points. I don't think you get many letters, but it would be fun if you could spell it. Okay. So what about the trunk of the tree? Okay, the trunk of the tree is cut down, and it's generally referred to as logs. And those logs can be used for lumber, for construction, or as a energy source, which is referred to as wood fuel. So we basically see that the logs are cut down, and then they are cut to specific lengths, which are called bolts, or that trunk of a tree could be used as an energy source, again called wood fuel. Okay. Wood fuels represent about 7% of the world's total primary energy consumption. Most wood fuels, 70% or 76%, is done in developing countries, whereas 77% of the world's population lives in those countries. In Asian countries, about 44% of the total wood fuel is used. So you can definitely see that it is in more developing countries that wood is used primarily down here in this source. In the United States, we're going to see that one of the largest sources of use is actually in lumber mills for construction, but surprisingly, a large amount goes to paper production. So approximately 60% of the world's total wood is removed from forests and cleared for energy purposes. And so this is called deforestation, and it is definitely a global concern, because if there's less trees, there's less leaves, and so there's less photosynthesis going on, and we don't get the protective qualities plants gives. Wood fuel is one of the main products of forest and trees, whereas only about 30% of the wood is produced in developing countries used for energy. In the United States, about 29% of wood that has been cut down is used for wood fuel purposes. Before fossil fuels, though, trees were actually one of our main sources of chemical compounds. Most of our medicines and other household items came from trees, which was great because they were a renewable source of wood. Industrial fossil fuels, not so much. So trees are the perfect planet's protectors because of the fact that they are a renewable energy source and because the leaves in the process of photosynthesis decreases carbon dioxide by absorbing it, which of course lowers greenhouse gases and therefore slows down climate change. But the second half of this talk is about the processes we've done with trees. And so let's talk paper. Paper making is thought to be one of the oldest chemical processes that uses wood. It was invented over 2,000 years ago in China. And in about 150 BC, we find the first organized production of paper in China. They used hemp, old fishing nets, plant bark, and water to make their wood. But China was very secretive about their process. And so other countries didn't quite know how to make paper. It wasn't until about 600 AD that Central Asia and the Middle East started setting up their own paper mills using China's techniques. It wasn't until the 13th century that Europe was making paper. So we're talking over 1,300 years from when paper was first produced to paper being made in Europe. When it came to Europe, Italy was one of the largest investors in the paper industry, and they basically based their research off of their techniques from the Arabs. Okay. In the United States today, based upon the paper, United States forestry and paper industry, the largest paper producing company is International Paper, which is headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. And 40% of the world's industrial logging goes into paper making. It's probably closer to about 50% as we speak today. To make paper, we basically take wood that will be broken down by various processes. We mix it with water and we press it to make paper. And it seems like it should be such a simple process, but there's so many variations and changes in the type of paper that makes it a complete field of science in its own right. To make paper in the United States, the primary source is pine trees. And what we find is that in the trunk of pine trees, there are two major chemical compounds that are found, cellulose and lignin. Cellulose is a long polymer chain that is made from glucose subunits. And lignin is a much more complex polymer. It's actually used by the tree to strengthen stems, and it helps in water transport. But pine trees are not the only source for making paper. If you look throughout history, you'll find rice paper, hemp paper, bamboo. There's even paper made from yucca, bananas, and mulberry trees. And so you can make paper using lots of different wood sources. So I talk about cellulose and lignin, and I use a term there, polymer, which may not be familiar to a lot of people. So what exactly is a polymer? Well, poly in Latin means many, and mer means units. So a polymer is basically a compound that's made up from many units. And those units are referred to as monomers. Mono meaning one, so 1 unit. So to make a polymer, we basically have 1 unit plus 1 unit plus 1 unit plus 1 unit. And after we get to hundreds of thousands of them, we create something called a polymer. And so to just visualize that, I take 1 monomer unit, I add another monomer unit, I add another monomer unit, and I keep on going until I've created something called a polymer. Okay. So for cellulose, the monomer that makes up cellulose is a compound called glucose. Glucose is something that we call a simple sugar, and you might have heard of glucose. It's the most abundant monosaccharide there is. And by monosaccharide, I basically mean 1 sugar unit. Glucose is used in plants during photosynthesis. It is used to produce water. It is produced from the water and the carbon dioxide that the leaves take in. And then the energy from the sunlight is used to produce cellulose, which is the most abundant carbohydrate found in plants. So we see that glucose, which is made from water and carbon dioxide, is produced to make cellulose via photosynthesis. And so here I have this really complex structure of cellulose, but what you can see is that I have the same unit being repeated over and over. So I have my monomer making a polymer. The other main component is lignin, and it's a different type of polymer. It is known as a phenolic polymer because it uses a compound called a phenol as the backbone. And this one's much more complex. It's not as simple as monomer plus monomer plus monomer. There's lots of pieces to it. And so here I show the structure, small piece of the structure, and 3 of the major pieces used to make it. The composition of lignin varies from tree species to tree species. So the structure of lignin in every single tree is going to be slightly different. So to make paper, the first part of the process is called the pulping process. And it's actually a byproduct. So what we do is we take those trees that have been logged and they cut the trees to make lumber. And then what they do is they collect all of the millings or shavings from the lumber process. These shavings then undergo mechanical or chemical pulping processes to create what is called pulp. And it's basically wood chips that have been broken down into very small pieces with water and chemicals. The wood chips are then cooked to remove the lignin and then are ground to create small fibers from the cellulose and lignin. The lignin is actually removed, because it will actually deteriorate the paper over time. And well, let's face it, we don't want our paper breaking down. So we remove the lignin to make the quality of the paper better. Okay, so in looking at the 2 processes, mechanical and chemical, we find that they have very different steps. In mechanical pulping, you basically take the wood chips and you grind them up using a rotary disc and a fixed steel plate. So we're going to produce both whole and partial fibers from the wood. It uses a lot more energy, but it has less waste associated with it. We will typically also heat the ground up wood and add chemicals to help in the process. In mechanical pulping, the lignin is not removed entirely, so you'll actually see that the paper tends to have a yellow-gray color associated. It costs more energy to do mechanical pulping, but 95% of the wood is converted to pulp. And so, what kind of paper do you think you might see around your house that is made via mechanical pulping? Do you have any ideas? Yes, newspaper. Newspaper is used based upon the mechanical pulping process. And when it comes to paper, newspaper is one of the biggest uses of paper. And so this mechanical processing, because there's so little waste, is very popular. Okay. For chemical pulping, they actually take the wood itself, cut it into wood chips. They're going to treat it with hot water and chemicals. And this process helps remove air pockets, which helps the fibers to break down more easily. The wood chips, water, and chemicals are then heated in a pressure cooker, and this disintegrates the chips, giving you your wood fibers, which tend to be much longer and not broken down. And you also produce something called black liquor. The black liquor is removed, and then the paper is actually bleached to produce a brighter, smoother, higher quality paper. So can you think about any types of paper that maybe might be used by the chemical pulping process that you could see around your house? Writing paper, magazine articles, your junk mail, your packaging, all would be examples of paper that has been processed by chemical pulping. Okay. When it comes to chemical pulping, there is a lot of waste associated with it, and this is one area where green chemistry is playing a vital role. We find that there are two different chemical processes for chemical pulping. There is the craft process, and there is the soda. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure just what happened. Let me go back to slideshow. There we go. My whole screen just flickered on me. So for the craft process, what we find is that they will add caustic soda, which is known as sodium hydroxide, and then they will bubble sodium disulfide through the pulp. The caustic soda is added to increase the pH, which causes the fibers to swell, and that actually produces smoother paper. It's the most common method of all of the chemical pulping processes. In soda pulping, we add caustic soda, but then we add another chemical called anthraquinone. And the anthraquinone is added to prevent the cellulose carbohydrates from degrading. So it makes a longer lasting paper. We will find that the process does decrease the tear strength. So that basically means that the wood is easier to rip or tear. So it does have that as a disadvantage, but it does last longer. The soda pulping process is limited to using material like straw and certain hardwoods, but it does have the added benefit that ecologically it's less hazardous for the environment. Once the wood has been processed and made into pulp, then the engineering comes into play. What you see here is a diagram for the paper making machine. And ultimately, the whole process here is just to wet the fibers, press them to make sheets of paper, dry them, and then smooth them. And what we see is that it's broken down into 4 sections. There is the wet end, there is the wet press section, there is the dryer section, and then there is the calendar section. And we'll go through what each of these parts does. Okay. So in the wet end, the pulp is mixed with waters, fillers, and additives, and we'll talk about what some of those additives will be later. And then it's pumped onto a wire mesh screen. This allows excess water to be removed by having kind of a suction, a vacuum pulled on it to help draw out water. Basically, this is known as the forming process. And what's very interesting is that if you look at your paper underneath a magnifying glass, you'll actually see that it has a direction to it. It has grain, just like wood does. And so they try to get the fibers to align in a consistent grain. And so part of this process of the wet end is to do that. The next section of a paper making machine is the wet press section. So the pulp moves off the wire mesh onto a felt belt. And basically pressure is applied to push out as much water as possible. Originally, the belts used to be made of wool, but now more commonly they use a synthetic fiber. And the belts actually go through what's known as a felt dryer, where they basically get dried and then they go back around and around over and over, drawing water out of the paper. Okay. Then the paper goes into a dryer section, and this is when it starts to look like paper. And the paper goes through a series of heated rollers, again, to remove any water. And that brings the water content down to about 6%, which is pretty much what's typical in an indoor atmospheric condition. So they're bringing it down to what we would basically experience most days as far as humidity goes. The last section is the calendier section, and these are large cylindrical rollers that put pressure on the paper and create a smooth finish. And an interesting fact is that right where the paper goes through the two rollers is called a nip. And the number of rollers used to smooth and finish the paper increases the smoothness. But at some point in time, if you have too many rollers, your paper strength starts to decrease and you get tear factors in your paper. And so if you've ever used a really cheap magazine and the papers rip really easy, it's because they've probably pressed the paper too much. So that's the ultimate process of making paper, but there's a lot more science involved. If you think about the paper around your house, you will see newspaper, which tends to be kind of dull gray yellow, but you also see magazines, which tends to have a shiny glossy finish. So how in the world do they get that glossy finish on magazine paper? Well, there are two methods. One is the process called super calendering. And so we basically see that they add on another set of calendering rollers and they add gloss to the less expensive paper. And this allows you to use the mechanical pulping process. But more commonly, they add coatings to the paper, and this adds brightness and shine to make higher quality stocks. In super calendering, the uncoated paper is put through the rollers, and what they do is they set the timing of the rollers slightly off so that it kind of pulls the fibers, making them shiny in appearance. For coatings, they will add things like china clay or other synthetic materials to make the paper look glossy. This step gets added between the wet press and the drying section. And we'll see that not all coatings actually make paper shiny. Okay. So I just mentioned china clay, and china clay is nothing more than a mineral. And it comes from a rock called a colloidite. It's known as colloidin or china clay. And I have a picture of what the rock looks like here on the right of the slide. And it's made up of aluminum oxide and silicon oxide with a little bit of water. And it's actually one of the most common minerals in the world. And in the United States, there are huge deposits in Georgia. And so you will see that a lot of paper mills are actually down that way. In fact, this little strip in Georgia is known as the white gold belt because of its abundance of china clay that is mined there. But not to be outdone, us chemists like to make brighteners too. And so something you might see in the news is something called optical brightening agents. And these are added to make paper appear whiter. And what they are is they are chemicals that actually absorb in the ultraviolet light range, and then they re-emit blue light and kind of fluoresce just a little that makes the paper look brighter to us. And we find that there are two major classes of optical brightening agents. One of them is 4,4' diamino 2,2' stilbene disulfonic acid, which is shown here. And then the other one is 2,5-bis benzoxyl 2-il-thiophene, shown down here. But these aren't just used in making paper look brightener. They're actually used in laundry detergents. And so now, if you decide to go and do some laundry today, if you have softeners that talk about being brighteners, you can actually take a black lamp and take a little bit of your solution, and if you put the black lamp on it, you will see that it fluoresces and that it glows with a slight blue light, because basically what you're doing is depositing these chemicals onto your white clothing to make it look whitener. And so this process is used in much more than just paper making, but they tend to fade over time. And so you'll find that your paper and your white clothes don't look so bright down the road. Okay. So that takes us to recycling paper. Nearly 2/3 of all paper is recycled in the United States. We find that you can actually recycle paper up to 6 to 7 times. But every time that you recycle paper, it needs some fresh fiber to be added. The reason being that every time you do the process, you break down the fibers smaller and smaller, and so the quality of the paper starts to decrease. So we actually find in the United States that newspaper can be recycled to make new newspaper, but it's also used to make cereal boxes, egg cartons, grocery bags, and tissue paper and toilet paper. Okay. Basically, in the recycling process, you have to separate the paper based upon the type and grade it is. You need to remove the inks. You need to make sure all glue, staples, and plastics have been removed. And then you can basically take the paper, mix it with water and chemicals to break it down and make new pulp, and then reprocess it through the same technique we just said. So one last trivia thing, why can you flush toilet paper? So let's see if you've been listening about why toilet paper breaks down so readily. I'm looking for your answers in the chat. Yeah? So if you think about the paper in your printer, okay, and if you put it into water, it would get wet, but it wouldn't break down. But if you take your toilet paper and put it in some water, you see it breaks down very quickly and easily. It's because toilet paper is basically made from lots of reprocessed papers, and so the fibers are shorter. And what happens is as the water comes into the toilet paper, it actually causes the fibers to swell. So compared to regular paper, cellulose in toilet paper is very short pieces. And as the water comes in, it causes it to swell and the fibers basically start to break down. So we basically see that they are released from one another and become small pieces. Now, should you flush paper towels, tissues, or baby wipes? No, great, Jacob. No, don't let anyone flush tissues, paper towels, or baby wipes. You will not be a happy camper. So all of these, yeah, they jam up the they jam up the sewer systems. So all of these have much longer fibers, and so they don't swell and break apart. And so when they get into your septic system, they will actually create something called a fatberg. A fatberg is a congealed mass in a sewer system that is the combination of non-biodegradable solid matter and basically grease and cooking fat. And so here I have a picture of a fatberg from Europe, from London specifically, and this fatberg weighed a whopping 13 pounds. It blocked a main water line and caused an entire third of the city to not have water for the day until they could figure out where the jam was occurring. So don't ever flush those baby wipes, tissues, or paper towels. Okay, so that is my lecture portion of today. And so from here, my last few minutes is going to show you how you can make your own paper. So to make your own recycled paper, you just need paper. Any old junk mail, colored paper, brown bags would also work very nicely. Don't use magazines or newspapers. The magazines, because they have a lot of the China clay in it, the mineral content's a little high and they don't work quite as well. You need a bucket for soaking your paper in. You'll need hot water. You can use a blender or a hand blender to make the process much faster. You'll need a tub, and then you'll need a special piece of equipment called a decal. But I wanted to just show you that you don't need to buy anything. You pretty much should have all of this around your house. And so you'll see in my next few slides that I kind of made my own decal by using things I had around the house. And then my other piece of advice for paper making is to use a chamois towel or a chamois or sponges. I like the chamois towels because they're ultra absorbent and you can wring them out and they're pretty much good to go right away. All right, so some extras you can do, you can use seeds to make seed paper, which you can then plant. You can use dried flowered petals. You can add food coloring if you want colored paper, or in my case, I used colored paper to kind of retint my new paper. Or you can actually, use dryer lint. Tin can and insect screen. Yes, Nigel. I had a roll of window screen because one of our screens had been ripped. And so I just made that using 2 pieces of wood, as you'll see. But yes, lots of options on how to make your own decal. So here's what I used for my setup. I had a red bucket. I had some colored paper. I had some lightweight cardboard. It was from some light bulbs. And then I used a blender, a good old household blender. And the first thing you need to do is cut up your paper. It's kind of fun, the kids' activity. You can sit there, watch TV, have your bucket, and just kind of cut up your paper into small pieces. I was hoping to make kind of orange paper, so I used yellow and red paper. My red paper had some paint on it, which ended up giving me kind of a pinky color, as you'll see as we move along. But I tried using that. So after you cut up your paper, you want to put them in a bucket with hot water and let them soak. The longer you let it soak, the easier the breakdown with the blender will be, but you don't really have to let it soak too long. I think I let mine soak for about 10-15 minutes while I was getting everything else prepared for this. I will say do this all outside if possible. It does get a little messy. I then took the paper and hot water and I blended it with my blender, and then I put it back into my bucket. And so this is the wood pulp. So basically what I have just mimicked is the chemical pulping process. Okay. After that, I have a tub. For me, it was just a metal tray. And I poured more hot water into the metal tray. And then I took my, I took my pulp and poured it into the water. Okay. So this is now my pulp as a kind of suspension in the water. And then I had some old, like I said, repairing a window screen. I had some wire mesh from that. I didn't make a full box out of it. I just took 2 pieces of wood, as you'll see, and attached it to the 2 ends. Okay. So from there, I made my little wire mesh decal, and you're going to put it underneath the pulp in the water, and then you're going to basically draw up and allow your pulp to drain. And then what I did was transfer it to a chamois towel by flipping it over, and then I pressed the paper with another chamois towel to remove excess water. And then I gently pulled the wire mesh away, and then it was just a matter of letting it dry. And so here I have a little video to show you what that process looks like. So I just took 2 pieces of wood and attached them to my wire. And I basically stuck it in, and I just kind of slid back and forth to get a nice even layer of pulp. And then I drawed it up out of the water. And then I just kind of, waited for a few minutes to let the water drain as much as possible. And then over on my stone wall, I had a set of chamois towels. And so after that, I basically just processed it, and my little puppy dog sat there and watched me enjoying the sunshine. So this is what the paper looked like on the wire mesh before I flipped it over. I then flipped it over, and I took another chamois towel and pressed to drain it. And then I pulled the wire mesh away, okay? And whatever wire mesh you use will kind of give your paper a kind of cool texture. So the next time I try this, I'm thinking I might try using the plastic liner that you would put in your shelves so that your glasses don't slide around in that, because I think it might give a neat texture. And you can just see I just took 2 pieces of wood and attached it on the 2 ends to create my own decal. So no fuss, no muss. I actually wanted to try making an embossed piece of paper. So I took this cute little charm I had, and while it was still wet, I pressed the charm into the paper, and I kind of just with my finger worked it in so that it was deep into the paper and that it wasn't going to be stuck covered with paper. And then I allowed the paper to sit outside in the beautiful sunshine we had that day and dry. And so here is a picture of my dried paper, and you can clearly see my little emboss. I used a lot of cardboard in my paper, and so my paper tends to be more kind of like egg carton, not quite as thick as egg carton, but it's definitely not as bendable and pliable. But I will stop sharing my screen and I will show you what my paper looks like. Okay, and so now we should all be able to see each other, I hope. Show. And so if you want to come up and I can answer any questions, feel free to ask away.
Hi, Jeanne. It's Mike Bertucci. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
I was the one audio caller.
Oh, no problem.
I was moving around, so I couldn't be by my computer. Yeah, but I was wonderfully imagining everything that you were describing, and I was specifically had a question when you were making your own paper.
Yeah.
So as you were talking about making colors, I've always wondered. I'm kind of interested in trying this myself, but I was wondering if I could take my paper I currently have used and maybe turn it into plain white paper. Is there a bleaching process? Is that the wrong chemical to use? How could you get paper, even if it was colored, maybe to get it to be white if possible? I don't know if you've tried that.
I have not. I'm sure you could probably add a little household bleach as kind of a wash process. So maybe you take your pulp, drain it, add some water, a little bit of dilute bleach, and let that sit, and then drain that again, and then rinse it to kind of make sure the bleach is all gone. It would probably break down the fibers a little. I don't think that would be bad. Jacob has just typed in hydrogen peroxide, might also work as a whitening agent. So that has the potential for being used. I haven't. I actually want to try one of my next projects in doing this. I actually want to try adding turmeric to the paper, because I make turmeric paper, which is pH sensitive. If you use an ammonia like Windex, you can turn the paper from yellow to red. And so I actually would like to make my own kind of litmus paper in that sense, with using turmeric.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, no problem.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I've got a few minutes left.
Yeah, last year at Da Vinci we used newspaper actually, Jeanne, and it worked quite well.
Okay.
I mean, you get a slightly gray sheet.
Yeah, I was trying to go for color. I don't know how well it shows. It doesn't look pink here, but it's kind of like a pastel pink. So this is the piece with the emboss in it. And you can see it's definitely a stiffer paper that I made. It definitely depends on how much pulp you draw up. So if you want thinner paper, you definitely want to dilute down the pulp in the water so you get thinner, because like this piece, you can see it's much more flexible on this side than, wrong way, than this side. It doesn't want to bend nearly as much. So, yeah.
Did you use your dryer lint?
I did not for this one. I used the colored paper.
If you want to dry it faster, you can use an iron, and it also gives you a smoother surface.
Yes. So one of the fun things that I saw was you could use your homemade paper and cut it and then weave it to make kind of a bowl, which I thought would be a fun kids activity. So this might be good for that.
There's another whitening agent you didn't mention, by the way.
Yeah?
It's used primarily as a filler, precipitated calcium carbonate.
Yes.
You knew I was going to bring that up, didn't you?
I was drawn to the organic molecules.
Yes, of course you were. You said titanium dioxide too.
Yes. I actually have a former student from Lehigh that actually works with titanium dioxide for paper plants. I was trying to figure out how to get him involved in this. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I'm not seeing any other questions. Anybody want to add anything else before we end this? Again, thank you for coming into my my humble abode and letting me tell you a little bit about the chemistry of paper. I think it's amazing how chemistry impacts us every day and lets us learn.
Well, thanks very much for doing this, Jeanne.
On here.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeanne. Thanks, everyone, for